Mr. Speaker, I looked into the PESA bill and I noticed that you have divided the bills into several sections, particularly the transitional interventions, financial intervention, sectoral intervention, structural interventions, and socio-economic policy measures. Mr. Speaker, I'd just like to ask, what would be the total budget for this bill, Mr. Speaker?
Mr. Speaker, it would be 583 billion pesos for 2020 and 730 billion for 2021 up to 2023, Mr. Speaker.
Now, Mr. Speaker, as to the character of the funding, what would be subsidy, what would be loans, and what would be for infrastructure as allocated by the bill?
Okay.
For infrastructure, it would be 650 billion. For subsidies, it would be 110 billion plus for subsidies, it would be 155 billion plus 253 billion. So that would be 408 billion.
Mr. Speaker, I raised that point because
Okay. Mr. Speaker, we would like to request Chairman Joey Salceda to take over.
The gentleman from Albay is hereby recognized.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Yes, to my good friend.
yes, Mr. Speaker. Again, Mr. Speaker, I just wanted to know the character of the funds for which subsidy will be given, the loans will be provided, and what would be for infrastructure, which I think are the three basic components of the bill embodied in the programs for economic stimulus program.
For 2020, which is the critical period, we are providing for 130 billion in infrastructure, 582 billion of basically intervention, mostly subsidies, direct intervention by government. And of the 583, 70 billion will be equity in financial institution, government financial institution, basically PGC, Philip Guarantee. In other words, 583 minus 70, so 70 is, but that will trigger 551 billion in credit stimulus. So all told for this year, you would have 583 minus 70, so that would be 513 plus 551, which is the credit stimulus triggered by the 70, plus, of course, the 130 billion in infrastructure, which we are trying to front load.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, again, I'd just like to clarify on the financial side. This would be 70 billion of the 550 billion?
583 billion.
580 billion. So 70 billion just for
It's equity in PGC.
Equity in
PGC. Because PGC can guarantee, they can lift up to 7%. So ang kaya niya is 7%. So theoretically, they can guarantee up to 200. They can trigger 240 additional 240 billion. And the equity in the land bank as well as, SBC ba kayo?
DBP.
And equity in SBC can trigger through relending. So ang mangyayari noon, yung mga pinapautang na SBC will be bought by land bank. In other words, it will be rediscounted. All told, mga 551 billion ang matitrigger nitong credit stimulus na siya po ang magiging bridge. Ang ibig sabihin ngayon, kumbaga naka-intubate yung mga SMEs natin. Ang ginagawa po nito ay dinidextrose natin sa pamamagitan po ng subsidies through wage subsidies,
yes,
other interventions to training, market access, all sorts of other not conventional, but rather, I could say na, in fact, some of them are very innovative government intervention by many of our departments. So, 583 minus 70, 513 plus 551 plus 130. That is the 2020 economic stimulus. So it's not just fiscal, because that's why we call it economic stimulus, kasi marami pong mga policy initiatives which are non-fiscal. For example, yung 59 billion ng pag-lift ng 1.2 million hectares na mga nakasangla sa atin na ngayon pwede nang gamitin ng mga farmers, halos mga 1 million farmers na pwede nang i-collateralize nila kasi ngayon hindi rin naman sila nababayaran, so para mga zombie property siya. So in other words, you are actually freeing up, liquefying the rural property market, and that actually has a more substantial, very big, pero wala tayong ginamit na pera. So economic policy stimulus actually siya. So kung i-add mo lahat po, napakalaki po talaga ng epekto nitong, this is a breakthrough legislation. It goes far beyond the traditional typology of a stimulus that even modern economies understand. Bawa, yung pagbawas po natin ng mga kailangan bayaran, mga OFW, imbes ng 9.9, binaba po natin sa 3.6. So there are a lot of relief, not just direct relief, but even regulatory relief and regularization ng ating mga underground economies. Kasi kung hindi po sila makakapag-benefit ng 551 billion na credit stimulus.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, of the total budget that you've mentioned, how much would this be in relation to the GDP?
Makakatrig.
I think about, Mr. Speaker, if I'm not mistaken, about 8% of GDP.
Mas magaling ka pala sa akin.
No, I'm just, I was, Mr. Speaker, I was just reading the 2019 data on GDP.
Yung fiscal stimulus po, 3%, additional 3% from credit stimulus, and roughly 0.6% from infra stimulus. Kasi yung infra, tinitingnan namin na may existing naman tayo na mga, it's difficult to roll it up, to roll that up at this stage of the planning, at this planning cycle. So mas maganda po yung mga infra, mabudgetan for next year.
Yeah.
So, in fact, I'm so tempted to speak na this may not be the last stimulus.
Yes.
Because in the US, there is stimulus 1, 2, 3, 4 already. This is actually the second stimulus, but the real stimulus, the first stimulus actually na ginamit natin through bayanihan, was essentially parang intubation yun. Huwag lang mamatay po yung pasyente. Ito, gusto natin yung pasyente mabuhay at hindi lang po mabigyan ng dextrose, kundi makabalik sa bahay at uminom na po ng vitamins.
Yes, Mr. Speaker, so you mentioned about 6.6 from the total GDP that we have. Then I just wanted to say for the record, and I agree with the honorable sponsor and the other sponsors, that in Germany, the stimulus package that they have approved is 60% of total GDP. In Italy, it's 44%. Spain, US, which you mentioned, is 14% of GDP. And Spain is 12%, the US is 14%. We are only looking at 6.6% of our total GDP. Now, Mr. Sponsor, I just wanted to clarify with you because you started to discuss about infrastructure. Then let me just segue to that for my other questions. You know, if we're going to work into infrastructure, I noticed that you have listed down several programs in agriculture and so on and so forth. But Mr. Speaker, would the sponsor agree that given this opportunity, for example, that we have a chance to really put down the budget for infrastructure, why don't we set up a program, for example, for a railroad in Mindanao, a railroad in the Visayas, dams that we need for Angat because there's lack of water in Metro Manila, the South Rail and the North Rail, if you want balik probinsya, if you want to decongest Manila, then why not put the fund in these following programs instead of listing down a menu of different programs, which we do not know the total effect. In this program, major infrastructure programs, then it's very clear where the direction in terms of the economic stimulus, instead of the helping the agricultural sector in Mindanao, in the Visayas, by putting up the railroad system, Mr. Speaker.
This representation, Your Honor, will be more than willing because what we're trying to take care of here is really the dextrose. We are talking about the vitamins. So in short, I am at the expense of my friends at the DOF in our executive.
Yes.
I think we will need that stimulus 3. So this stimulus doesn't preclude any further discussion of what is good, because as far as I've read the Constitution, the chief policy-making body of this country is Congress.
Yes, so Mr. Speaker, maybe at a proper time, these particular programs can be listed down as the priority infrastructure which the President, the administration, can undertake. I can imagine, Mr. Speaker, for example, in the case of, the traffic in Metro Manila, if we have the South Rail connecting to the Port of Manila, MICP, and the Port of Manila, and if this would be the money that we would be spending for the economic stimulus, then we do not only reply to or are relevant in the case of infrastructure, but we are able to decongest traffic by providing cargo railroad trucks instead of the existing trucks that we have for Metro Manila, Mr. Speaker.
The genesis, or should I say the seeds for stimulus 3 is already in cures. A very good, I would say, legislative effort by our Deputy Speaker. At the same time, Your Honor, it can be upscaled, Your Honor, into multi-year. During our first year as Congressman in 1998, if you remember,
Yes.
there was actually a multi-year infrastructure program where every congressman is asked to contribute to a multi-year. So in short, Your Honor, this is not the first. It has historical precedent by way of policy making by this Congress in order to make a very substantive effort in terms of what you can call constituency-led effort in order to address the real needs of the people and as well as optimize the real prospects, opportunities that are actually, that reside in not only in our constituency, but of course as well as in our country.
Thank you for that, Mr. Speaker. It's always been an honor to listen to the great Salceda. May I ask, Mr. Speaker, as an economist,
Susumbong na kita kay GMA eh.
as an economist, Mr. Speaker, what would be the comparative advantage of the Philippines in terms of the economy and natural resources?
Una-una, actually, Your Honor, our median age is only 23.6. Human resource.
Human resources.
Our socio-cultural ability to adapt to our resiliency, essentially. Third, even our archipelagic geography is actually a natural defense against pandemics. Fourth is basically, I would say, our long-run conservatism in the way we run our finances. So we have the lowest 23% foreign debt to GDP. We have only 44% after all the deficits in the first, from January to April. We're still 44% debt to GDP. We came long before from 106% in 2003. Our ability to systematically and orderly dispose and resolve our issues through democratic means of long pestering, like yung mga utang noon through DBP from 1970s. We resolved it through CBBOL. Now CBBOL is nowhere. We already fully paid for it. Yung ating po mga IPPAs, na umabot po ng 26% of total GDP. Ngayon po, as your committee looked into it, through PISAM, we have resolved it. In short, this country is not wanting for that economic, I would say, ang ating pong animal spirits
Yes.
as a people, that we are driven, that we can also unify around a certain concept or idea called a prosperous Philippines for everyone. And then you can easily work back at what is needed by way of policy, legislation. So, tingin ko, Your Honor, we have what it takes. After all this COVID-ness falls by the wayside, this country will get a credit upgrade. I'm not, I am a market, I came from that market. Ngayon po siguro, pag nababasa mo, halos masasabi mo na there's exaggerated pessimism. I've seen that all. But you know, once you get through the fundamentals of this country, especially our fundamentals and especially our policy, yung mga, makikita niyo po yung mga policy na ipinasa dito sa Kongreso, the way we were able to deliver on major structural reforms, the PSA by my good friend Sharon, the FIA, the RTLA, and almost all other fiscal policy reforms that have been passed, I think will certainly create a new impetus na nakikita ko naman po kasi kung kinaya ni GMA ng 8.1, next year po, kakayanin ng Pilipinas ang 8.1.
Thank you. Mr. Speaker, I asked that question because, as you well know, I was before in the Department of Environment and Natural Resources. And two of the major resources of the country, which is the logging industry and the mining industry, have been put to a halt. And these are the two major sectors that I think could contribute to the economic stimulus of the country. We have seen that in Chile, and I know that you know this case, Mr. Speaker, that they were able to develop because of the program that they have in mining. Till now, Indonesia's economy is resilient. 25% of their GDP is coming from the mining sector. And so, Mr. Speaker, I asked that question in relation to the economic stimulus program. During the time of the Depression, they were looking into gold. And now here, we have, in fact, the resources for that. We have, in fact, the existing mines, but these were never expanded because of the policy limitations that we have imposed on the sector, Mr. Speaker.
You know, you go through a certain ranking or classification in terms of how highly contentious a certain policy direction is. So I would say that once we get over all this COVID-ness, the Committee on Ways and Means has already finished the fiscal regime for mining industry, and it has been pending with this majority leader. So I guess that question is better asked of the majority leader than this sponsor, Your Honor.
Yes. Now, Mr. Speaker, you know, before this COVID happened, many of my friends, many of those associated with me were doing their respective businesses. Now, in this bill, you have stated there that there will be no payment of the principals for 1 year. I think this would be a very good assistance to those who have businesses or those who are those who have availed of loans in order for them to set up their businesses. So are you saying, Mr. Speaker, that for 1 year, all the banks will be required not to be or not for them not to be paid for a year of the supposed principal payments of the mortgage loans?
Well, the answer is yes.
Okay.
And I guess it's not unique because you'd rather prefer an orderly and systematic framework for everyone to understand each other. We could have like, how do you call it, a buffet. But what we'd rather have is like, okay, put everybody pari-pasu. Everybody gets, now with respect to the banks, the interest will roll. But except that, of course, they will not go after certain enterprises simply because you will not make certain enterprise collapse simply because you ask for a principal repayment. I think it's, I've seen programs such as this in other countries wherein it is understandable given the, alam niyo po, ngayon second quarter, baka bumagsak tayo ng 9% yung GDP. Siguro naman ang mga bankero, naiintindihan nila, kung gusto nila mabayaran sila at may magandang kliyente pa sila, wag muna nilang singilin. Andito naman po yung gobyerno, pwede naman po magbigay tayo under the PGC, hoy, wag mo muna pakialam si Sharon Garin.
Yeah.
Kasi bibigyan namin siya, pag hindi nakabayad, kalahati po ang mananagot gobyerno. So we have all these schemes and the appropriate structures in order to ensure that banks will not lose money, they will not lose their shirts, but at the same time, we provide the appropriate lay the groundwork so that everybody can start anew, have a fresh capital, so to speak. So, Your Honor, I think the former President GMA is already waiting for you outside.
Yes. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I would like to congratulate the sponsors for that because I think that would really be great support for the economy. And if you're saying that the banks will also be supported, then that would be good in terms of, let's say, the reserve requirement, that they will not be, as part of the monetary policy, they would not be forced to have that. In relation to that, would the members of Pag-ibig, SSS, GSIS, and all other institutions, the individuals who have loans, would they also be part of this program? That they will not be allowed to pay the principal for a year, Mr. Speaker?
Yes, Your Honor, for consumer loans. 1,000 needles on myself before a single one on my neighbor.
Yes, because
So
Mr.
in
Speaker,
short, the government will have to set the example.
Yes.
So these are government-owned and controlled corporations, and therefore,
Mr. Speaker, because if you check the provisions of the bill, I do not see it was only in section, when you mentioned about the banks, that you were discussing the non-payment of principal, Mr. Speaker. But, you know, at any given time, since you agreed already, Mr. Speaker, if it is not in the provision of the bill, then in the period of amendments, then it can be included, including those Pag-ibig, GSIS, SSS, and all other individuals who have loans, especially in government financial institutions, will not be or will be exempted from paying the principal for 1 year, Mr. Speaker.
well, the word here right now is encourage. And if the House is so minded, then a stronger word can be accommodated.
Yeah. The reason I mentioned that, Mr. Speaker, about
Wag mo nang pilitin yan.
the reason I mentioned that, Mr. Speaker, about the banks and financial institutions, because, you know, you were talking about SMEs, Mr. Speaker, and just a matter of concept. If I'm an OFW and I will put up a business and you will give me a loan without collateral, without interest, what business could I enter into
Kasi sinasagot.
given this situation,
Wag ko sagutin.
Mr. Speaker? Mr. Speaker, if I may reiterate my question, with the indulgence of the majority floor leader, if I'm an OFW and I was sent back to the country, and for example, I will put up a business with no collateral, no interest, only the principal, I don't even know the COVID situation. I don't even know what business to enter into. And you know that 8 to 90% of startups fail. So the reason why I'm saying that is, I feel that this would be a problem. But the existing loans of those who have borrowed from GSIS, SSS, Pag-ibig, and the banks, if they are given a reprieve from paying the principal, including the interest, then that would be a good support and assistance to them.
Marami naman po na kahit nung governor po, binigyan po ako ng 6 years bago po ako magbayad ng principal. So, taon-taon binabayaran ko lang ng interest. So, hindi po imposible para po sa mga financial institution yung ganong klase pong usapan. Pero para po masabi lang na Kung meron pong puso, ito pong bill na to, ito ay patungkol po sa mga workers ng SMEs. SMEs account for only 13% of total GDP, but they account for 60% of total employment. Parehas din po sa agriculture. Agriculture account for only 9% of nominal GDP, but the entire agricultural farm sector, in terms of employment, including agro-processing, account for 33% of total workforce. Of course, there are a lot of overlaps there. All I'm saying is, ito pong bill na to was specifically designed to immediately provide employment support towards our 60%, which is the SME, and our agricultural sector. Yun po talaga ang puso ng PESA. Siguro dapat yun ang pangalan ng bill na to. Puso ng PESA.
Mr. Speaker, I already see the majority leader carrying my bag. I think he's about to carry it outside of this session hall. So let me thank Mr. Speaker, the Honorable Salceda. It's always a pleasure hearing from him his insights in the economy. Of course, the Honorable Stella Alabastro, who's only a first-termer now, but has proven to be better than her husband, Congressman Deputy Speaker Kimbo. And Mr. Speaker, our economist, lawyer, Deputy Speaker Garin, accountant, lawyer, Deputy Speaker Garin. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thank you, Mr. Majority Floor Leader.
Thank you, the gentleman from Anak Kalusugan.